The theater? Good. Right.
Very understandable.
Yep. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. This is the third meeting regarding the town's transportation master plan. I'm Susan Hartman. I'm the Director of Planning and Wastewater for the town. And tonight's meeting, we're going to be focusing on the town's design standards, and that has to do with the aesthetics of buildings and signs throughout town. The town's broken down into 5 different districts, and tonight's focus is going to be on 2 of those, the downtown and the Clark Road corridor, and soliciting some feedback and garnering some more information from the public about some potential changes for those design standards. And so we'll tackle each one separately, starting with the downtown and then moving into Clark Road. And so with that, I'm going to pass this on to Eric Smith with Mark Thomas Engineering. Oop, Eric, I think you're muted.
Apparently I'm still new to this whole remote meeting thing. I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you very much. And I am looking forward to this workshop, and I'm sure it's going to be a very informative and productive meeting that we have tonight. And I'm really looking forward to hearing the feedback from the public in terms of what their priorities and focuses want to be for the development or their refining of the town's current design standards. A little bit of important housekeeping items to kind of get out of the way first. The meeting is going to be recorded, and it'll be available through the town's website. So if you miss anything, or you come in late, or for those of you who want to kind of refresher, it's all going to be available online probably forever. Yes. So yeah, don't worry about it, and that'll be really important when it gets to the survey portion of it, because you will need to have those refreshers at your fingertips, and you'll have that. For those of you who are attending remotely through your computer or remote device, the camera and your mic have been turned off. This is just to maintain some continuity and some control of the workshop, but fear not, you will have a chance to ask questions, hear some answers, and also provide important feedback and comments at 2 separate locations or times during the workshop. As Susan mentioned, this workshop has been split up into 2 segments. We have the downtown area. As soon as we're done with the presentation on the downtown area, we'll have a Q&A and comment portion for that, and then we'll switch gears and tackle the Clark Road portion, and at the end of that presentation we'll have the Q&A and comment portion for that as well. When we get to those Q&A times, we will have some detailed instructions on how to raise your hand, both for those people that are in the audience and also those who are attending remotely. So stay tuned for those. When we get to the end of the presentation, you'll be given a heads up in how to go about doing that. And then go ahead and hit the next slide, Marty. Appreciate it. Next one, please. Thank you. The purpose of the workshop tonight is primarily to receive comment and feedback from the public. This is an informative presentation that is designed to introduce the updating of the standards for Clark Road and for the downtown. And those design standards affect the aesthetics and the character elements within those areas. I think it's important to note that I use the word introduce because that's really what this is. There's been no preconceived decisions made, nothing set in stone. We haven't made any really design thoughts on it. This is purely for us to give you some ideas, generate some thoughts from the public, and then hear from you, directly from you, what are your priorities, your values, what is important for you in terms of the design standards. And we're going to do that through a slideshow presentation. So it's probably going to be about 10, 15, 20 minutes, somewhere in that range, depending how wordy we get, where we kind of give you some images and some drawings and some sketches and some visuals so you can all see not only what these elements look like, but how they can fit within the greater context of the town of Paradise in the specific areas. And then at the end of the presentation, that's when we'll have the forum for the questions and answers. And at the very end of all of this, when this is all said and done, we've gone home, there will be available online for everybody to contribute further in the form of an online survey that will be live until I think it's midnight on August 12th of this year. So you have 3 weeks to provide even additional feedback beyond what is what you come up with during the Q&A portion of tonight's meeting. So a lot of opportunities to really kind of get the ear of the consultant team and the town staff so that we really have a full grasp of what you all want to see out here for the town of Paradise and its redevelopment. Go ahead and hit next slide, Marty. So the two areas we're talking about, this is a visual to help get you dialed in to what we're talking about, is the first portion is going to be on the downtown, which is from Elliott to Pearson, and then that's north-south orientation, and then east-west it'll stretch from Skyway to the Paradise Memorial Trailway. Clark Road will extend from, the portion of Clark Road will extend from Skyway all the way down to the city limits, which would include the industrial area as well. Next slide. And in those areas, we're going to be looking at everything from building facades to awnings, freestanding structures like trash enclosures, retaining walls, next slide, street lighting, both vehicular and pedestrian, and then street furniture. I think one thing is I want to mention that it is important to remind everybody is that we're going to be showing images of all of these so you know what they look like, and we'll be providing some verbal description of what some of these are and also some pros and cons of some of these things so that you can all have an understanding and appreciation of what all the different factors are that go into some of these design decisions that we're going to be having. Mute, Marty.
With that, my name is Marty Armstrong, and I'm with the Mark Thomas team as well. And I'm going to go into exactly what are the design standards and what's their purpose. So we're trying to provide you an opportunity to give us some feedback as to what you really see the themes and the overall appearance of your downtown area. And this is going to once again roll into Clark Road. This portion, I'm going to repeat it, is really specific to the downtown core and what you're envisioning as being the identity of your downtown core. So here we go. So the purpose of the design standards is to really provide not only you as the community, but it gives specifics to developers, architects, and planners. It gives it to our world and community leaders in your world what exactly you envision as the community is the design and construction of the new commercial facilities, multifamily housing, and some of the public spaces that you're going to be enjoying, for futures to come. The idea is to really focus on, and once again, it's all about your input, and that's really what we're aiming for here, is opening up the dialogue between yourselves and us to create this document that's going to be handed off for folks that are going to be coming in and reinforce the character and personality within your community. So Here's what the current design standards for how they look currently. And for those of you that haven't had the opportunity to see how this is all broken down, it's a series of matrices that allow for the builder, the landowner, whoever it is, to come in and give specific criteria for building design, for sign design, for wayfinding, for streetscapes, and also site design. So it gives some very specific elements with each one of those 4 categories, and it delineates exactly, or at least the idea of the character that you're seeing right now, and what we are encouraging them to use. Once again, right now we're not set in stone. This is what you have in place, but this is what we're trying to mold and massage to make it be a little bit more applicable to what the community is going to be looking like in the future. So here we go, downtown design standards. So we've broken down the downtown into 3 main areas. The main core of the downtown area, we're really trying to emphasize creating a walkable downtown. And I think as we're doing that, we broke it down into 3 main locations. We got Almond and Fir, which is area number 1. We also have Birch Street and Black Olive Drive, number 2. And then we're also going to be looking at some of the areas and elements that are going to be happening that we want to emphasize on Skyway. By all means, Skyway does have a big chunk of downtown. One, Almond Street and Fir are in that core of that walkable space area, as well as number 2. So we're going to see a little bit of overlap of some of the design elements that we're suggesting, and once again, that we really want to get your dialogue as to what you see as being that image that you want visitors, your neighbors to really enjoy for futures to come. So the first one, Almond Street and First Street. We've created a couple images here. One's an aerial looking down on, it's an isometric looking down on to Almond Street. And we can see storefronts, we can see retail fronts, and these aren't necessarily in place by all means. But one thing that we were able to showcase here is what is being proposed for the transportation corridor. So we're going to see 2 lanes of predominant vehicular traffic. We're also going to see the implementation of a bike lane, a dedicated bike lane on both sides. And then there's going to be alternating on-street parking, similar to what we have shown here. So we have worked with our team and Mark's team and the city staff's team to really show what's being presented to you as what's going to be happening on Almond Street. And as we start looking at some of these elements, some of the things that stand out from the aesthetics that we're focusing on, one being street trees, landscape pockets. We're looking at some of the lighting elements and potentially some of the banners that are going to be on some of the lighting elements. But we're also looking at areas where we might be able to provide some benches, some outdoor seating, and really, once again, promote that whole experience and character of what that downtown walkable space is really going to be like. The blue area that we have noted here is the Future Transit Center. So we'll look into that a little more closely on a future slide here. But we do have the design that was already created for the transit center, and we're really emphasizing bringing some of those elements and how we bring them to the street and create that theme and character that we're talking about. On the right hand side, you can kind of see another perspective view. Once again, the 2 lanes going in each, 1 lane in each direction, the accessibility for bicycles and how it's a dedicated lane, and really emphasizing the safety of alternative methods of transportation besides walking. So we can definitely see some cyclists utilizing this dedicated lane, and once again, providing for some on-street parking for visitors and special events. It just kind of gives you a flair of the character ideas. But this is where you're going to start seeing some of these elements showing up here, and these elements are also going to be showing up in the survey later in the presentation, and also where you're going to be able to engage yourself into providing what you see as being the best suitable fit. So here we are in a site plan, and we're looking at some of the elements that I was mentioning before. Planter areas. We are looking at some on sidewalk seating areas, whether they're, and we'll go into some of the imagery of some of the benches. But the walkable space, and that's giving you as the user access to retail, commercial, storefronts, and really seeing how you're going to move through your downtown core. So the planner areas allow for a softening of the non-walkable space. So it gives you shade, it gives you protection from the elements in the wintertime. But we can also see there's going to, once again, this is denoting an overhead light. But we've got some benches, potentially some pedestrian type bollards that could be utilized in this design. But you can kind of get a sense and feel of where these pockets can occur in relation to visibility of pedestrians and how they're going to be circulating in the downtown, especially here at Fern Almond. So here we go. Images, and these are site amenities that we're really trying to emphasize to get your feedback in. All the site amenities that we're looking at here, whether they're the benches, whether the trash receptacles, or they're even the lighting, all of them had different characteristics in which we really want you to provide your input on. Benches, for instance, they could be wood. They're going to be comfortable to sit on. They have a less longevity than a concrete bench. A concrete bench isn't going to be as comfortable in the middle of summer, nor is it going to be as comfortable in the middle of wintertime. So you've got a little bit of give and take on what these amenities are going to be providing you, and it's going to create that whole character. So as we start looking at, this is a cross section of Almond Street, and what we're looking at, we're looking at some of the outdoor spaces. So we're getting a sense of, what can be some of these activities that happen from the storefront, to the right-of-way area, which includes the sidewalk, the parking, the bike lane. Here are the travel lanes, and it's a pretty good-sized travel lane, but we also have some really nice landscape areas that are going to provide for that character that we're really looking for. So here, in instance, we have shade trees, we have ornamental flowering trees. It's about character. So you're going to have that opportunity to really say, yeah, I could see that being part of what we identify the town of Paradise really being, or not. What are these elements that you feel are going to be the best match as we're going into the survey? So once again, trash receptacles, lighting standards, and these lighting standards can provide for banners and different occasions that are going to be happening throughout the year. And this once again really creates that character and that feel for downtown. So here we go. So this is going to be what's going to be replicated in the survey. So you're going to see these elements once again in the next week, in the next couple days, or even in a couple weeks. When you really dive into the survey, you're going to be able to reconnect with these images and say, hey, do any of these really fit with what you're seeing as being an option that you would like to see implemented? And it's part of your feedback that gives us the direction to what we're going to be creating. Once again, we're looking at 5 to 10 years down the road of this being the real theme for downtown and the rebuilding of it. Here we have the benches, and once again, benches. Some can be soft. Wood's soft. It's great to sit on. Metal's got its pros and cons as well. It's hot in the wintertime. It's going to be really cold in the summer, but the longevity of it is going to be a little more durable than a wooden bench, and the same applies for a concrete bench. But what's the theme that you're looking for that you could really envision being that downtown character? Here we go into some other elements. We're breaking it down even more. Some of the paving components, the hardscape, what's going to be happening on that ground plane that enters, allows for a storefront to really identify itself. We want your input in areas like this, and this is really where your involvement is critical in promoting what you're envisioning. So we've got hardscape, which is going to be the paving materials, and then once again we're going to have planter areas, which is going to be the softscape, and then we're also going to have the retail component of what are going to be the identifying elements for these storefronts that you're going to need to look at as you're going down and enjoying it as a pedestrian or as a user for your downtown area. What do you see being the best fit? Is it on the building? Is it hanging out over the building? Is it out in the walkable area, or is it not? But this is where you're going to be able, once again, say yay, 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 or nay, nay, nay. And you can also put in your own recommendations. So don't feel like what we're putting in front of you is set in stone. If you feel like you wanted to add your own input to it specifically, then by all means use some of the notations that are going to be provided on each of the questions to provide that extra dialogue with us. And once again, just reiterating what I just stated, these are going to be replicated in the survey. So what you see here isn't set in stone, but provide us some feedback on it. Now, here's the second area. We got birch and black olive. Unique area because we do have the opportunity to work with what's already been designed for the future transit center. But once again, how do we start bringing in some of these side amenities, trees, bike locker areas, not bike locker, but bike rack areas? What do you want that to look like? And how do we encourage future builders and developers to bring these components in to continue that theme that we're looking for? Elements here, we're really looking at planter areas, screening some of the built structures that are there, but really seeing how this ties into what you're envisioning for the rest of the area. Here's once again a cross-section of it. As I mentioned, bike racks, we could see a bike rack, we could see a flood of them, or we could see them scattered about. But what are those bike racks really going to be, the identity? They could be an art sculpture. They could be very unique. They don't have to be what you're seeing here. But what we're really saying is we do need to address the need for it, and it tells us where we're going to be putting them and in what quantities we're going to be providing them. The bus stop and the shade shelter areas as well for the transit center. For the transit center, it's already been delineated what's going to be there, but we can also start looking at what are some of the other things that could be here. Once again, we see the benches. There's the opportunity for the trash enclosures again. Do we have dog drinking locations here? I don't know, but that's where we want to have that dialogue with you and getting that input from you. Cross section here, and once again, you can really get into the nuts and bolts of what this area is going to look like. There is a 6-foot sidewalk. There's once again a dedicated bike lane. You don't see the on-street parking here, and once again, these are the travel lanes. They do look rather wide, but this is what's being designed and is going to be installed. Bike lane, and then once again the community park on the opposite side. So this is a really unique area where people are going to be frequenting, and where should these elements go, but how do you want it to look? Once again, here we go again, bike racks and bus shelters. Provide your input. By all means, there's opportunities here for some great feedback from you. And third, here we go into Skyway and options. Once again, we got options on Skyway. We've got a unique opportunity here on Skyway to really establish what the theme is on the walkable area, but also kind of pull some of those ideas out here onto the main thoroughfare of Skyway as you're going northbound. We can see here, there are currently some storefronts that have done some improvements, but here we've taken some of the elements that are there and trying to open the door up to you, the public, to get some additional feedback. What do you envision in some of these planter areas, at grade? And when I say at grade, that's, below your knee. What are some of those elements that you could see happening there? As you go up and down the corridor, we do see some raised planter areas, and once again, we see that being a nice component to be complementary to the storefronts, as well as that whole unique experience that you're going to be creating as you're walking up and down it. And here we are again, intersections and parking. What is going to be the best solution for that hardscape element that's in those areas that you feel are most suitable for it? So feedback on all these. We've gone through 3 different areas. There's a little bit of overlap on all of them, but we're really trying to get your feedback on what is some of the characteristics that you envision for the town of Paradise. Here we go again. Sidewalk, planters, and landscaping near the storefronts. All 3 of those. Provide your feedback. It's going to be great, and establishing this document is something that is going to get installed. Illustrative sections here for, once again, this is on the southbound side of Skyway. So once again, paving areas. And this in here is really emphasizing some of the crosswalk sections. And then once again, what's going to be happening in some of these storefronts. There is a lot of opportunities here, and we're starting to look at the ground plane and what can happen in front of the storefronts, but we don't want to just leave it as an open Pandora's box. We really want to make sure that character is felt and it's consistent and throughout the entire town. And there may not just be one solution for it. There could be, multiple different options that we'd be looking at, and when we're referencing what's going to be happening in the storefront. Here we are again. Options. We've got lots of options. Help us delineate what you best see in the best fit. And then here we go. I said Pandora's Box, and here it is. Future examples of some unique ideas that can add some splash and flair. They could be pockets. They could be small pockets. They could be existing elements that are there currently. There's some ideas from an artistic standpoint that are in each one of these slides. What do you really see as being something that's appropriate or not appropriate? And some of the elements that you could see, this being what we've seen up and down the state and throughout the nation as we're dealing with allowing restaurants to move out onto the street and having dining space areas. Is it something that we can incorporate into the design guidelines? That's for you to provide feedback to us. So once again, a lot of elements here. It's up to you now. And then here we go. Kevin's going to go into some of the architecture of downtown. And then what we'll do after that is we are going to go into some dialogue for the downtown area once he's complete with his segment. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me okay? Marty, you got me? Cool. So just a couple slides here. We'll go through some of the architecture that we've talked about. And again, we're focusing on the downtown area. Just to describe what's going to be on the screen in front of you and kind of set some rules here. This is all about information gathering, and I know we've said that before, but just to reiterate it, especially with our architecture. In the process of this project so far, we've received feedback from town staff. We've developed a series of images here to help spark a conversation regarding the architecture of the areas that we're looking at in Paradise. Again, we're starting here with downtown. It's important to mention it again, we're not here to dictate what the style of Paradise should be. Instead, we're here to listen to your opinions and thoughts. So with that, we gathered a selection of images, and you'll see them on the next 3 slides here. The following images have been selected just to help inspire our conversation. At the top left here, you could see a downtown area, and again, these images will show up on the survey. So I'll do a bit of description here to help point your particular areas that we'd like to get your feedback on, but these images will show up word for word and slide for slide on. So just to go through these images real quickly here and point out some. The top left again is a downtown area. You can see a connection between the buildings, walking surface there, the sidewalk. But these buildings have a bit of articulation. The front door that lets you into this building is set back a little. There's an opportunity for the businesses that are inside there to spill out onto the street, create some interaction. And that's happening through the architecture and how that works together with the landscape design and the urban design of the sidewalk. As you move to the right there in the top middle, there's another example of a building that's a bit more set back. Take a look at the style of the architecture too. You see the canopies coming out of the windows, tall cornices way up at the high top of the building, and maybe some of the color tones might be attractive. Sure, can everybody still hear me? There we go. And then as you move over to the top right there, there's an example of an architectural style in a downtown that's a bit more dense. You could see a variety of materials too and a variety of signage types. In that one at the top right, there's a bunch of metal, there's a bunch of wood, there's a bunch of glass. Are those things that you see as being representative of the aesthetic that you see in your downtown? And then to wrap it up real quick, the bottom 2 images there again are a downtown on the bottom left, perhaps a bit different. You see taller buildings and a bit of streetscape with trees. And then on the bottom right there, another example of something that's set back a little further. Take a look at the canopies over the windows. You see things like clocks on the towers that are raised up at the corners. Again, these are all just meant here to inspire some conversation. Next slide there, Marnie. And as you get into the survey, there will be opportunities for you to speak freely and type your mind. we do give you the opportunity in a number of places just to type whatever comes up. So if none of these images really inspire what you're talking about or thinking about for Paradise, we'd love to hear that. We give you the opportunity to voice your opinion. In commercial architecture, and this happens both in downtown but also possibly down in the Clark Road corridor, there's an opportunity for buildings that don't necessarily fit the mold, so to speak. I'll point out a couple here that are maybe straying a bit further away from an architectural style that you might envision, or perhaps this is what you envision. I'll point out two, one at the very bottom left, a bit of a modern take on a mountain style, and then the one at the bottom right, which you may know well. This is the Starbucks that was built on Skyway. Those two have a different style, of course. The one on the bottom right, Starbucks, is a box building, but it has a lot of nice materials applied to it. The one on the far left, the bottom left, is still a modern style. However, it's got a bit more of a mountain interpretation, if you will. Can you see in your downtown, in your commercial architecture, the use of modern materials? Do metals belong in your architecture? The rest of the images here really play into a style that we've heard described before. Mountain craftsman is a term that's been thrown around here and there, and it's kind of hard to put a name to that style. Perhaps the term mountain craftsman is just an identity that helps to serve as a loose description or a guiding beacon of what you think architecture in Paradise might be. And if you take that survey and you get the opportunity, we'd love to hear what your description of mountain craftsman might be, or if that's a term or a style that resonates with you. Again, and actually this is a great point to give a preview of what we're going to talk about a little later in the Clark Road Design Standards section. These design standards that we'll be talking about here and actually creating and proposing have the ability to control a lot about the architecture or very little about the architecture. They can be prescriptive and tell you that you're only allowed to use certain things, certain materials, certain colors, which coincidentally is just about where the design standards live right now in their current state. Is that the appropriate thing to do? And should we limit or encourage certain materials or colors to be used in your architecture? Again, those are the things that we're looking at, and we would love to hear your feedback. I think that's all for that one there, Marty.
Great.
The last slide here is a peek at some of the land uses that exist in the downtown area. There are some multifamily zoned parcels in the downtown area. And it's interesting to think about what those style of those buildings could be. Perhaps they are a bit more residential in nature, as you can see on the top right there. Perhaps they're a bit bigger, as you can see on the bottom left. Or perhaps they reinforce some of the more commercial style that you might see in other buildings that are not family residences. They're actually businesses, such as the top left. I mean, in some ways, that building almost looks like a commercial building, right? Perhaps it looks like a hotel. But you can see that there is a connection to the street down below. A patio there, a great use of canopies that helps connect the inside to the outside. Does that speak to you? Do you think that that's an architectural style that's appropriate for a multifamily residential apartment? And I say apartment buildings, but this could also be condominium. Down at the bottom right, there's a couple other styles there that are a bit more reserved in nature. Perhaps they use the same materials that you see in the other architecture in downtown, but they're a bit more simple. Perhaps they're a bit more modern. Do they still speak to that mountain craftsman architectural style, or are they a bit too far in left field? Again, we'd love to hear your opinions. You'll have the chance to rate each of these images individually and pick which one you think speaks to you the most, or which several speak to you the most. But you'll also have the opportunity to write and comment about them as well. I think that's it for that one, Marty.
Yeah, so with that, we'll open it up to Q&A for downtown. And once again, we did mention that if you're remote and you are coming in on your computer, there is an icon that has a hand and a face next to it. Go ahead and just click on that one. If you are in the audience, by all means, just raise your hand. Susan or Colette will, allow you to come up to the podium and fire away with those questions. No pun intended.
Thank you. We do have a hand raise here in the chambers. Ron, if you wanted to come up to the microphone.
I'd be happy to speak to that, or maybe keep going.
It's a little bit hard to hear from that microphone online, so if you could just, if whoever answers the question could just restate it. Thank you, Ron. You know, that microphone has a lot of issues, so we're working on it. So I know. So for now, whoever answers the question, maybe you could restate it for the online audience and then answer it. That would be great. Thank you.
And if you have more, I'm happy to. Not to interrupt your train of thought. My apologies. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Anyway, and with regarding one of the things I've seen in our reconstruction is so problem. I'll give you but on the part aesthetic property. So house hunting. Anyway, the town property. Just ugly. Owned by the town. What's up with that? So, and yet I know that you're asking to put nice stuff in. So, about that. So, that doesn't that much. Those are
Thank you, Ron.
Shall I? Yeah, the great questions and great points that you brought up there. I'll speak to what I can speak about. I think that a lot of what your concerns were can be addressed by other things, including town policy and sure. So with regards to the design standards and how they address things like size and scale of buildings or consistency in materials, the design standards address only so much. You know, things like lot sizes and parking requirements, as you mentioned, are definitely a big part of what what drives the aesthetic of your downtown and Clark Road as well, of your town overall. But the design standards, again, don't address things like how big your buildings can be or how tall they can be or how far they're set back from the street. So with that said, the design standards can help give the tools to apply to what can be built based on zoning, if that makes sense. So the images that we showed there were intended to spark conversation and help you take a look at some of the things that you might see applied to the size and scale that can be built in Paradise. And it is difficult, I'll tell you, to find images that represent an architecture that can be Paradise. Quite frankly, the size and the scale of the buildings, as you mentioned, is very different than you see in other places. So it takes a bit of imagination, you know, looking at those images and distilling what it is you like about them, and applying it to what you could see in Paradise. It's a fun exercise and it's challenging, but that's where we find ourselves.
And then also to address the comments about existing commercial buildings or existing commercial construction that's happening and those design aesthetics also. And I know it was mentioned at the beginning, but that's part of this exercise also is the way the design standards are written now. It's more of a list of things you can't put up, but it leaves a lot of latitude for what can be put up. So it's that discussion with the public about, should that be narrowed down to where we're very specific about the finished material that's maybe the majority of, you know, the visible exterior, or we narrow it down to very specific types of frontages. But right now, the design standards are pretty broad, and maybe what people are seeing, how that's being reflected in real-time construction right now, people are recognizing that's not really what we're looking for. And if the standards continue like that, then that idea that that same kind of maybe metal building continues to go because it's something that the design standards allow. So this is great feedback to find out is that one of those items that we should be narrowing down the focus even more, and be more specific about what we want that exterior, facade of the building to look like. The vegetation in the public right-of-way? Mm-hmm.
Vegetation.
So I think what the goal would be to get back feedback about what the public would like to see in terms of landscaping and the placement of there. And then we can start to focus on what do the existing municipal code requirements call for, plus there's the state landscaping guidelines we still need to be consistent with. We already have standards for drought tolerant kind of plantings, and try to marry that all up for what will work. And is it something that you start seeing where the commercial business, if there was an overwhelming response that people would like to see more plantings towards the right-of-way, is that something we start changing with our landscape ordinance, that's part of your business, is that you maintain this landscaping that's in front, that's part of your landscaping plan that you put together, and we just talk about those different options. But that's what we're trying to get back, is the feedback of what would the public like to see? And then how does that work with our existing standards? And what might we need to change to make it work? Mm-hmm.
And then I think Mark Maddox may have something to say on that subject as well to add to Susan's answer. Mark?
All right. Can you guys hear me okay? Susan, give me a thumbs up. All right. No, so I think if I'm understanding the question is about design standards, especially as in the addition of landscaping in the public right-of-way and who maintains that work, and that's certainly a balance we want to keep an eye on. But for example, the downtown projects we're working on right now for Birch, Fir, Foster, Almond, and Black Olive, we have a good amount of landscaping on Almond, not necessarily as much on the other side streets, but for those plantings that are going to occur with some street trees, shrubs that are going to be really low maintenance, low water use, but really spruce up the corridor, that's going to become a public works responsibility for ongoing maintenance. And so that's something we're keeping in mind as far as a balance. We can maintain that vegetation and landscaping just like we do with the community park, with own forces or with contract forces, but that certainly is an ongoing cost that we have to be aware of as we go forward and look to either plant more or maybe not plant as much. So I'd say the corridor of Almond Street between Fir and Elliott will have the most amount of landscaping, and there will be some side corner treatments that you've seen on a couple of the earlier slides at the other intersections. But in general, there's not a lot of room in the public right-of-way to have a really large amount of public landscaping. But if anything we do provide in the public right-of-way would need to be maintained by our public works team.
And I'm just going to break in just for a moment. I'm going to make a quick change here for those who are here in the room. Rather than using the microphone at the podium, if I could ask you to use that microphone that I just positioned over there on the side of the room. I've turned it on. You can stand there. It's a little bit awkward. I'm sorry about that, but it does work. So then our online participants will be able to hear everything that's said as well. I apologize.
Thanks, Colette.
Ron, did you want to? Perfect. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the architecture standard you're talking about. I think for the downtown to have a much more structured architectural standard specifies what we should have as opposed to what we can't have. The reason I say that is we need to embrace the fact that we're a mountain community. Okay? We live up here on the hill with trees around us. A lot of them are burnt, but as they grow back, we need to see that in our downtown in some fashion. I know we had that long-term recovery plan that we all spent months working on. One of the themes I took out, I'm a bit prejudiced, but I took out the fact that a lot of people like the mountain craftsman style, and that's the big beams, exposed rock and things of that nature. I think if we build the downtown with that concept in mind, general concept, we will attract folks to it. Yes, it'll be nice for us, but it'll also be nice for our visitors. That's really what I push for, in that we want to take tax monies out of the visitors as much as we take it out of the residents. Let's have them help fund all the things we can't buy right now because we don't have a good tax base. We lost 90% of the houses. They'll come back, but let's not put the burden on them. Let's put, not a burden, but let's put the joy on the visitors that come up here and say, oh, that Paradise, what a cute town. It's got a really nice maybe boutique hotel in one area, a brew pub in another area with a garden, has cute little restaurants. Let's go up there for lunch, or let's go up there for dinner and spend some time up there. Oh, by the way, spend some money. That's what I envision for the downtown to draw that. Now, Clark's another story. You might not have to have the same height requirements on Clark Road and the other roads, but the downtown should look like a mountain downtown and have some relationship back to the 49er Gold Rush, the Gold Nugget, and those kinds of things. You ought to have some of that and embrace that fact and then publicize that fact and get folks to come up here because the draw they have for a cute little town like Paradise can be. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Are there any additional comments in the audience there? I'm not seeing any online.
No, sir.
Okay. With that, thank you everybody for your feedback and input. And once again, as we do come to the conclusion after the next segment, your input is what we're aiming for. And once again, keep sharing your thoughts and perspectives of what you're envisioning. So with that, we're going to move out of downtown, and here we're going to move into Clark Road. Uniquenesses, I think the last gentleman that just spoke really touched on a little bit of some of the unique qualities of Clark Road. There's commercial, retail, and some residential, but you're also going to have the influx of a little bit of industrial. And I think with the overlap of all those, and not necessarily completely eliminating the idea of the walkability of it, but definitely there's a lot of things to consider on Clark Road. So the extent of it, like we mentioned, we're starting at the top of Skyway and the connection of Skyway and Clark, and coming all the way down to Pearson Road, a substantial stretch that we're taking a look at. So we are looking at the limits of the Clark Road design between Skyway and Pearson Road, and the idea of this being commercial. We're going to go through a few example images of, what we would like to put in front of you, and once again, initiate that dialogue and feedback as to what you're seeing and the identity of the town of Paradise really evolving into. So number one, Clark Road. It's a unique section here. There is utility lines that do go up and down Clark Road. We're looking at the potential of having building setbacks a little bit more with some upfront parking areas, and it's those areas that have that situation where we're going to be looking at how do we screen that, or do we want to screen it, and what are the proper plant materials to be putting it within that right-of-way area, that setback area that's considered right-of-way, that we might want to screen some of the parking elements and really enhance and beautify what we're seeing up and down as we're experiencing Paradise on Clark Road. So landscape, we have, once again, lighting elements. You're going to have a different set of lighting elements, and maybe a completely different theme that we have on Clark Road, contrary to what we just saw in the downtown core. So what do you envision? What are you seeing? And then we can also look at some of the paving elements. The paving elements, all three of these are going to be some of the key components that really define the character as you're making your way through the town, or your visitors making a way through the town, that they're going to take with them. And it's those images, once again, that are going to bring them back to kind of enjoy how things are maturing and growing and evolving over time, but the theme's going to be consistent. So as we start looking at images and different elements that are going to be there, we're looking at, from an aerial here on the left, some of the landscape areas and how they impact what's happening in those commercial retail areas. I mean, once again, we still have the street trees. You may see a little bit larger areas of planter areas for screening, but at the same time, you're going to see some other elements that are kind of unique to this corridor, and that's going to be biofiltration areas where we're going to buildings and certain building developments are required to put these in here due to state mandated green code. And these are elements that you're going to see a little bit more frequent over there. Once again, this is a BMP or filtration area. And then we also have street trees. What are going to be some of these street trees that you see are appropriate? The lighting elements, as I mentioned, and once again, paving, and how to keep that paving soft, durable, attractive, yet feasible, and something that's going to endure the elements that you have throughout that entire corridor.
Hey, Marty, real quick, let me interject really fast. Just to get back to how Kevin answered the question regarding the size and the type of the buildings or anything like that, and the difficulty of finding some images that are truly fit within like what Paradise is. Similar with Clark Road, very rural arterial road coming in, 2 lanes coming in. You know, there's elements of these images and the paving elements or paving images that Marty is going through that I think we want everybody to focus on, because while we can't have big avenue street trees and large sidewalks like this, like you're seeing in that top right hand corner, there are certain elements you can pull from that and say, is that applicable to like a corner where you have a crosswalk or something like that? We can do some enhanced paving at that crosswalk just to provide some visual cues to pedestrians that, you know, this is a place where you sit and you wait, and also that visual cue alerts drivers that that is a pedestrian zone in that area. So there's little things like that you could take from each of these images and apply to Clark Road. And ultimately, when the project is designed, how those design elements get applied to that design, that's up to the designer at that time. But right now, we just want to find out from you is, you know, do we want to have those sort of elements of accent and enhancement at those key locations along Clark Road?
Great. Thanks, Eric. Once again, cross-section of some additional elements that, once again, are in the design standards. We see them being something that we would like to get your feedback in, and how we're going to implement it into the next set of design standards that we're looking at. Those elements being fencing. I mean, fencing we're going to see in a lot of commercial retail areas. What are things that you see here that from a material standpoint, from a height standpoint, that you see as being really appropriate? Different sets of signage elements that we're going to see on this corridor in Clark Road. Different than what we see downtown, but what is going to be the most appropriate? Freestanding tall stacked ones on the building, or individual ones for each one of these elements? And then we're also going to see something that we touched on in the beginning, and that's trash enclosures. I mean, we can really define what are some of the materials that we see as being appropriate. And Kevin may go into that, and that could tie into the architecture. But we're also looking at some of the how these elements, where they're at, where they're located, size and requirements are going to be predicated by the actual users, but we can really define where they may go. And once again, here's another input opportunity for you, and this is going to pertain to retaining walls, and this is part of the design guidelines. What materials do you see would be consistent and thorough, but part of that identity that we're seeing throughout the Clark Road? Here we are again, fences, signage, trash enclosures, and definitely retaining walls. We can see those, especially as we're dealing with hills. A mountain community, there's going to be plenty of opportunities for retaining walls, especially as we're looking for creating flat areas. This is something that over time will become a little more of a dominant feature within this entire corridor, and this is a great time for you to provide some feedback on it. Once again, we're looking at cross sections of it. Same elements. We have transit shelters, and we also have paving elements that Eric touched on just a second ago. These areas become safety zones, and this is really allowing the users in the vehicles to be heightened awareness areas where they can see materials and be identifying that they're coming to a pedestrian zone. And this is what we're really trying to emphasize, not from just aesthetics, but really trying to promote the safety components of these areas. Materials are going to be the key component to it. Here we are, bus shelters and crosswalks. Once again, you're going to see these elements again. Are they appropriate? Are they something you like? Provide your alternative options if you don't. And with that, Kevin, yeah. And I think this is part of this is going to be the end of Clark Road. This is open. It was a quick one. We did touch on a little bit of some of the architecture elements that Kevin spoke about on the downtown area. And, some of those elements, once again, from an architectural standpoint, are still going to be part of Clark Road. But what we're opening it up now to is, do you have any questions, audience and people online, as it pertains to the Clark Road aesthetics?
I'm Jody Jones, and I really do want to hear from the public on this, but as a council member, I have a few concerns that if I share with you now, perhaps you can incorporate them into the survey and get that kind of information back to the council. I want to see the vision that Ron Lassonde talked about in the last Q&A session. That mountain craftsman, sort of something that ties us together. But I'm also concerned about the cost to people coming back to the community. Their resources are limited, and so I'd like to see something that looks good, that doesn't cost a fortune. So as you're asking the public for their opinion, is it possible for you to say, this one is $1 sign, this one is $4 sign? Something that gives them a comparison. Because as a council member, in the end, I don't want to adopt design standards that are going to be so costly that people don't want to develop here. So that's one concern that I have. The other concern is I also don't want to adopt design standards that are not fire-wise. And I see a lot of wood in some of these images. And so I'd like something in your survey and in the things that come to council that tell us what is going to be the most fire-wise thing to do. You would think it would be metal, but maybe some of these signs that look like wood really aren't wood, but are they more expensive than metal? So that kind of information, I think, would be helpful to the public and also to the council. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know if there's a member of the consultant team that would like to address being able to incorporate that cost into, at this point, the survey is already created, but maybe some of that public feedback, we could provide some of that. Is there someone who can address that?
Go ahead, Eric. I see you unmuted, but I was just going to say real quick.
Yeah.
Two of the slides
Go for
come up here, talk about the amount of control or the level of control that these design standards have over what folks can do. And there's two specific slides that we added in there to ask you that question. Do you think they should be very restrictive or less restrictive? And we'll have to talk here, and maybe, Eric, you're going to discuss this, but there could be a possibility that cost component could be incorporated into a number of those questions. I'm curious to see what Eric says, though.
No, it's, we can give some general cost information on that. The cost of materials is so in flux right now. We're talking about improvements that are being projected over the course of several years, so it's hard to what costs we come up with now, that was being applicable 5 years from now. I'd hate people to make decisions based on that because I'd be misguiding them in that way. But there are ways where we can provide them some general cost per unit of some of these elements and just some general overall, maybe a range of some of these elements, just so, like you said, just to help that visual of what it is, this type of improvement it really is, because part of it is what it looks like, but then also part of it is what does it cost. And so the value of that, if I can squeeze out a really nice looking bus shelter, and the cost of that extra is only $5,000 or whatever, then that maybe in my mind that's valuable. But if I see that number and it says oh, it's $10,000 extra, that's like, okay, I don't see the value of that type of bus shelter over this other more generic looking one. So it does flavor the decision making process in terms of having a better understanding of what those costs are. So that might be something we have to come back to and follow up on as a subsequent submittal or something like that, to provide those dollar amounts separate from the survey.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted to address another aspect of that as well, Jody, and thank you so much for this question. Staff is also looking at some creative funding sources that may be able to offset the cost for businesses who do, do some, potential upgrades, or if there is cost associated with this that might be outside of what their own funding allows. So we are looking into grants available and other creative funding sources that may address that. So, and we're hopeful to be able to present that alongside this information later this year.
I do want to mention, just recognize the thought of the fire safe or fire resistant element. The question was asked, I think as a team, that is always, especially with Paradise, that is on the forefront of our thoughts and any consideration we have. And yeah, the materials there are some materials that intuitively would withstand a fire more than others, as an example, concrete over wood. However, the fires that came out in 2019, nothing could withstand those. So even the concrete, you see concrete benches start to crack and that sort of thing, depending on the heat level that you have that comes through, the fire that comes through, and how fast it happens. And so there's all these different elements that you have to take into account. But that said, the materials that we come up with will be the most durable that are applicable to Paradise. And also keep in mind is that it gets hot during summer in Paradise and it gets cold during the winter. So, that variation from hot to cold, that's also an element that we have to take into account. And the long-term effect that fluctuation in temperature has on elements like concrete, you'll start to see some cracking in that because of the shrink and swell that happens over time. Whereas wood's more pliable, it gives and takes, and so there's all these different gives and these different factors you have to take into account. But the fire is definitely the most important one that we're considering.
I had a quick comment about that too, if we have time for it. So much of construction, and especially this relates to buildings, so things like the bus shelters or transit center or multifamily apartment buildings or commercial buildings are regulated by building codes. And the folks that make those building codes are pretty smart about what's fire safe and what's not. And in recent years, those building codes have become much more strict, and they're going to be the ones that have the final say over what can be built as far as being fire safe or not. A lot of standards that regulate that sort of stuff. So we can have the ability to help encourage a certain look or style, but the style can be accomplished by using a number of materials that comply with those requirements from the codes.
Ron, did you want to address? Perfect. We have one more comment from the chambers.
Just wanted to piggyback on what Jody had said about the cost aspect, and I think we got too specific, the 5,000 versus 10,000. What I'd like to see, I think what Jody was asking for, something more general. For example, in the fences, you could have a chain link fence, you put a $1 sign. You could have a wooden fence and it would have $2 signs. You could have a cinder block or a rock wall and it would have $4 signs. That's the level of accuracy we're looking for right now, not the 5,000, not the 10,000. But just to give us a general idea, this is cheaper, this is more expensive, I like this one better, is it worth the more expense? So it gives some people who are price sensitive an ability to say, yeah, I think I could go down a little bit because the cost is more important than the aesthetic. Allow us to have that input as we're trying to decide which one we like better.
Perfect. Like a Yelp review type of thing. It's just you see the dollar signs, you know whether you're getting a cheap Carl's Jr. meal or you're getting some fancy $20 burger. Get it. Totally. Yep.
So that's all the comments we have from the chambers.
Okay, yeah, there's no additional ones online, but I think we can kind kind of move forward with Clark Road, but we do have just a few things, and this is specific to the public outreach survey. Just an informative couple slides here. You know, first and foremost, please take the survey. Your input, it's critical. We've repeated it numerous times. Please share it with your neighbors, share it with your community members. By all means, the more the merrier, and this is pretty much what the format's going to look like. We brought up the benches. You know, it's very specific. It's going to be quick. It should take about 15 minutes to run through it. But nonetheless, this gives you the opportunity to really rank or choose as many as you like or none. But you know, your feedback is ultra critical. And you know, once again, here's some of the ones Kevin had created. Just examples. So we're looking at color. We're looking at certain groupings. Your feedback. Just here we are. It's about feedback. New developments. You know, we're going to go into a lot of different a lot of the elements that we presented this evening are going to be just brought in front of you, and you're going to have some good opportunity to provide that feedback, some identity from the presentation itself, and come back to these questions. Here is what you're going to be coming down to. And once again, this is going to be shared on a few different solicitations throughout the city, as well as on the website. You can definitely click on it, get your input, and by all means, as Eric mentioned at the first part of the presentation, you have until midnight, August 12th. And by all means, if you feel like you need additional time, share it with a council member, share it with somebody on staff, but definitely get that information to us. And that concludes it. Thank you all for your participation.
Great, thank you.